Today we have our panel on the National Book Critics Circle, Books and Publishing, featuring Walton Muyumba, Karen Long, Donna Seaman, Regina Taylor, and moderated by Elizabeth Taylor. So without further ado, please help me welcome our panelists.
So, greetings, and we want to make this as sort of collaborative a conversation as possible. And I'm just going to, let me just say that for those of you who don't know, several of us are part of this organization we love, which is the National Book Critics Circle. Anybody heard of it? Know about it? Yay! It's it's the largest association of book reviewers in the country, probably the only one, and it's sort of really dedicated to sort of the art of criticism, spreading the word about criticism, and kind of both when we give these huge awards, but we also give awards at sort of the other end of the spectrum. We give, a lifetime achievement award for somebody who's a great luminary, like last year. Toni Morrison, Joyce Carol Oates, our beloved Studs Circle. We've had great, but we also really believe in people sort of at other points in their career through an award called the Balakian Prize, which is an award given to a reviewer for a body of work, often somebody sort of beginning their career. And that is really important. And we also, in a new award, honoring one of the great legendary book editors in the country, book review editors, John Leonard, the Leonard Prize for the best first book, regardless of genre. And we do the literary prizes in fiction, biography, nonfiction, criticism, and of course poetry. So several of us have gathered. We really are sort of committed as an organization to think about the sort of the great ecosystem of books, and what we're doing and trying to get sort of insightful conversation going in the country about books. So here we are at the Literary Festival, the largest outdoor literary festival in the country. And I have my colleagues from the National Book Critics Circle, and there are little cards we carry. Not really, but there is Karen Long, who runs this amazing set of book prizes, this Anisfield Wolf Book Prize. Phenomenal. It's been around for over a century.
80 years.
Well, almost. And it will be around for more than a century shortly. Anyway, she does really great work. And you're chairing which panel now? You're chairing nonfiction. And Donna, everybody in Chicago knows Donna Seaman. She is bookless. She just finds talent and she writes about it. She's written books herself. She is an amazing critic. Now, she happens to be off the board for the moment, but we're trying to wrestle her back in. And Walton basically did a few years in Texas, but we finally rescued him and got him out of there, got him back to the Midwest. He's at Indiana University, where he is a big professor there, and he is a great critic and is this year chairing the criticism committee. I'm Liz Taylor. So we usually just kind of have a general conversation, about like the problems and perils of publishing and how to get books to sort of out into the universe and how to sort of elevate book coverage. That's what we've done in the past at this festival. But a lot of us just believe in luck. and really cool things happen. And so there's my friend back there, Rebecca Ford, Terry, who told me about this amazing play, Regina Taylor. Now, of course, everybody's heard of Regina Taylor, amazing actress, playwright, and I think now we're going to have to call her an honorary member of the National Book Critics Circle because she was sort of in with us in the trenches about really thinking about sort of books and what's happening to them, electronic, and what's progress, what's gained, what's lost, what's access, all these questions. And she has this amazing play, and you've seen it, Stop, Reset, astonishing set, amazing play, sort of about. And I'm gonna just say we saw it last night. I think Don saw it before. We're still buzzing about it. It's an amazing play, and I'm just gonna at first ask Regina to just talk about how you've written plays and been in movies and stuff. Like, I had not really thought of you as interested in publishing necessarily, but what brought you to sort of start thinking about publishing and books and progress and the sort of hidden dimensions of technology?
Yes, it's very personal. I love books, and my ritual, being here in Chicago, my ritual is getting up every morning and going to the bookstore that was across the street from me to get a cup of coffee and browse the aisles and put my hands on a book. Every morning I have to do that. One day I came back home and the bookstore was closed. It was about 5 years ago, so I'm looking for what's the next nearest bookstore. And that was 5 years ago was when all the bookstores were closing all around the city. And I had to start thinking about what my feelings were, what my connection was about books. And I had to go back to my mother reading to me growing up. Then I could read myself. One of my first memories was my mother, her hand on mine, creating children's books with crayon, construction paper, creating my own children's book from the age of perhaps 5 years old. And that was very empowering, her gift to me in terms of the importance of creativity, to follow your imagination, desire, hard work, to make your dreams concrete. And that's why I'm a playwright today. It is to be able to name yourself in this world as other people try to name you, that you have the power to name yourself, to reinvent yourself, to rediscover yourself, and to rewrite yourself all over again. And I've done that in many different ways throughout my life. Creativity as a survival tool. So I started thinking about my relationship with books as these bookstores were closing. And I started putting my thoughts on paper. That became this play. Started out as enraged, ranting about my love of books and how people were trying to push me onto Kindle, and I don't want to be on a Kindle. But getting a Kindle anyway, someone gave it to me, and I'm looking at it as a source of research. But if I want to read for pleasure, I need a book in my hands. I love the weight, the smell, the feel of an actual book. So I knew that I needed to expand I need to open up my mind to other perspectives, that I wanted to write a play that would give other people's angles, viewpoints, and give weight to each of them on the issue of what was happening today, with the changes that were occurring in the publishing industry. E-books, actual books, where are we going in terms of books? So I had an interesting conversation. One of my first interviews, sit-downs, was with a guy by the name of Robert Melcher, who is a publisher. And he was around that same time, probably a couple of years before, thinking about his role in books. He'd been in it for most of his life, publishing. And his favorite object that he created were, he created pop-up books. And he loved pop-up books, but knew that as bookstores were closing, it might be the demise of pop-up books. The appeal of pop-up books is that you walk through the store and you may not be thinking about buying a pop-up book, but you see it on the shelf, you open it up and you go, aha, and you buy it. So he's saying, how can you do that online? So he's thinking, I'm going to take some time off. He took about 1.5 years off, tried to rethink his business, rethink himself. And when he came back, he gave the reins over to 2 young men who were early 20s. And they came up with an app for Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's book. That was basically, you pinch up, you have this book, you have your Kindle, and you pinch up the words and you see sky or ocean. You have a windmill and you blow on it and it starts whirring around. It does all of these wonderful things, and it's basically a pop-up book that's translated into this technology. So that's how he reinvented himself. It was the first popular app that had content. So he reinvented himself and continues. He does seminars on the future, speculating on what books might look like 50, 100 years from now. So I found that really fascinating. That's how the play started, just talking to different people who were fluid in technology, opening up my mind to the possibilities, and knowing that we are always going through this type of cycle, generational cycle of change. That's why I started looking at all the changes that we're faced with in this moment in time. Technology permeates our everyday lives. It is also about the changes that are happening right here and right now in terms of social changes, race, gender, sexuality, economic changes. How are we dealing with it? And we all deal with it in different ways. This was the beginnings of the ideas for Stop Reset.
Oh, that's great. So, Walton, or Karen, Donna, seen the play? What resonated for you guys? When you, what questions about publishing were there for you? I mean, for you, or I'll start. Well, you guys. So, well, I love the play, and I kept thinking. I was like thinking, what would, I don't know if you know Haki Marabuti of Third World Press. I kept thinking, what would Haki be thinking and saying about this? Starting a publishing house, trying to get word out, and it's hard. And I just kept thinking. So, one question is, how much is the book? You located in Chicago, but you you expand it beyond, right? It's supposed to be universal, not Chicago specific. But what did you draw from this city?
I draw from this city the idea of strong entrepreneurial spirit. And you do have people who do pass on their legacies, their businesses from a family business, generation to generation. With people such as go back a minute. The play is about Alexander Ames, who is set here in Chicago, a Chicagoan, who is 70 years old. He's trying to keep his business going, book publishing business going, as ebooks are outselling actual books. On this day, as he hasn't wrapped his mind around exactly what changes he needs to make in terms of technology, he's going to downsize, and he's interviewing each of his workers. All of them are over 40 except for one, and that one is Jay. He's 19 years old. He's the janitor. He's semi-literate, and he's tech brilliant. So you have this 70-year-old man who loves books and looks at books as vessels of history and memory, vessels that hold the ancestors, people who might be washed away or invisible if not for books. He is talking to this 19-year-old who has no interest in history. It is only about the present moment and the future. But he finds the young man's ideas heartening in terms of survival. So he's thinking of how he can negotiate with the young man to embed himself into the future, to pass on his legacy, is what the play is about, but it's really about how we deal with change.
One of the reasons, is this on?
I don't know.
Okay, can you hear me on that?
Yes.
Great. One of the reasons I paused before is that the play is so laden with fantastic ideas and so brilliantly played that coming up with a question quickly is difficult. But I love the play, and part of my love for it came from all the challenges that are built into the work. And I think one of the things is we're thinking about as book critics, and I just chaired a panel at our member meeting, not this past Wednesday, but the Wednesday before, where we're talking about representation of women in book pages, specifically as reviewers and their books getting covered. And one of the things I asked my panel on that day is whether that conversation that we're having internally might matter to readers like you, whether or not you need to have the critics tutor you on these kinds of problems. And one of the things I wanted to ask Regina about her play is this: I had the same kind of sensation that we adapt technology rather swiftly, rather smoothly, in fact, right? It's supposed to be user-friendly. And I wonder whether you worry, and maybe you don't, because I think the play's up and running and brilliant, whether or not we, the rest of us, are worried about whether we're reading our books on phones or tablets, or whether we're getting them physically. And I have a split, since I teach at a university, I always split things between centuries. There are 20th century people who like physical objects like books, and there are 21st century people who don't really care. They're there to get the grade, they'll read it however they need to, and they want to keep it moving. Jay is one of these 21st century people, and not to, if you haven't seen the play, he's also maybe a special creature. But I wonder about that part, that, you know, maybe this is merely a split between not simply 70-year-olds and 19-year-olds, but like people who are, you know, 40-year-olds like me and my 22-year-old students.
Right.
That's not a far split.
I think that different people take it in different ways. I think you have 70-year-olds who are just adept at being on the computers and social media and all of that, that they've taken to it as readily as some 40 or 30-year-olds who are complaining about being the need to always be connected, always checking in, that they get complaints if they don't answer their emails or people texting them immediately. I think it really is about the individuals at this point. But I find it interesting that when books were invented, before we had the oral tradition, people gathered around the fire and you had this person who had all the knowledge, all the history, and he was the one who chose what history would be passed down, whose stories would be passed down. It was a hierarchy here in terms of that decision making, the storytelling. With books, you could distribute this knowledge to the masses, and if you could read then, learn to read, then you had this knowledge, and people were complaining, oh, people are now cut off from society, alone in a room with a book, this device, cut off from their fellow man. And who are we raising then? Who are we becoming? We don't even have to memorize things anymore. How do we pass down these things from one generation to the other became the discussion of the day. I think we're right here again with those same questions.
Yeah, that the play made me think a lot about how stories are told and shared and preserved, and made me think about attention span. There's a lot of talk. I interviewed Edward P. Jones this morning, and he and I were talking about literature that takes time to read, and he was talking about his students who like flash fiction that's only 1 or 2 pages, and just talking about that depth and involvement. And in your play, that seemed to be part of it. Like, you want things quick and slippery, the way the screen is, or do you want to really get deeply into it? So I wonder, like, does language change? Do our vocabularies change? Do the cadences change? And that seems, and of course things do change, but our need for stories remains the same. Our emotional complexity remains the same. So it's very interesting when the vessels are shifting. And in publishing history, there was a huge freak out about paperbacks, as though those were something tawdry and was going to, rob literature of its gravitas or something. So when we come to ebooks, even though I really do love books, I have to remind myself of that it's the language and the stories and not just the vessels that really matter.
With Stop Reset, which I hope everybody rushes to see, one of the things that grabbed me by the jugular is it doesn't presume to present answers. It's not didactic. So you're invited to use your device or not, go to the website or not, take in what you want in the way you want, pick up and join in a pretty revolutionary way for the theater. And it's mirrored in the content in the sense that I'm much more of an Alexander Ames in my bibliophilia, but there's something incredibly seductive about Jay, who is interested in setting some of the burdens of history down. And who of us haven't been tempted by that at times? So maybe Playwright Taylor can talk a little bit about trusting your audience to go there with you with this.
I do trust audiences here to question from the very moment that they enter the theater. You are challenged from the moment you come in. I think people bring their history with them. So, for instance, you come into the theater and there's a corridor. It's the Goodman Theater, and it's the Owen Theater, which is the experimental space. You can configure the space any way you want to. With this, we have a runway stage, and audiences are on all sides of the stage. So you see the action of the stage, and you see the other audience members, your community, watching as you're watching. You come in, you have to enter the space through this corridor, and on the wall of this corridor, you have Mr. Ames' artifacts, what's left. and I had to start thinking, what is left of this man once you pass away? So I have his suits, his ties, shirts, shoes, hats, his photographs of family and workers, people that he knows. I have his records and his books, those things that are important to him. What's left? And you can touch these things. One of his favorite books was Tar Baby. So you have the book. You can flip through that book. And you have a Kindle version, so you can choose to do one or the other or both, and swipe the Kindle going through the book. What I notice even then from just people entering the space is what they choose to do. If they want to flip through his records. And again, it doesn't necessarily go along within the lines of age. You have older people flipping the records. You have young people who have come back to vinyl, who are very curious about these records. And you can touch these things, or a lot of times, especially the young people, come in and they're the QR codes, and they immediately start engaging with the artifacts in terms of their cell phones. And people are watching each other, going, oh, I can't do that, or I wish I could, or I'm not interested in that at all, and go on into the theater and look at themselves. As you're going in, you have the choice of the playbill being on your device, your cell phone, or picking up the paper. And again, it's interesting to me who chooses to pick up the paper or not, engage on their cell phones or not. So you start questioning who you are in terms of these times from the moment you step into the theater, before you even start watching the play. Having people, I think, question who they are in terms of history, and I give enough clues for people to follow the storyline all the way through very clearly. Your interpretation is according to your history. I like that.
Just to affirm that, I did learn something about myself and kind of something to be a little awkward about. So after the play, there is, as Regina described, this amazing kind of case that has this, photograph of Ames and some artifacts, and it's behind glass, and it's a book company, and so I'm like, oh wow. And I thought to myself, like, could this have been an African American book company in Chicago that I didn't know about? Could this really? And so I was really like kind of upset with myself, and I found myself Googling to see if it really existed, and she had discovered it, and it had been written out of history. And then I looked around. I mean, it seemed like other people understood that it was imagined and reconstructed. And so, it does create this idea of what's real and what isn't, and how sort of this world online, I mean, you were sort of extending it. There's some danger in that. I mean, people look at literature, I mean, sometimes some crazy literature, some offensive literature, and you think, is this real, is this fake? You don't take it seriously, and sometimes you should. Do you ever, anybody, is that resonant for anybody, or I found it, you could look at some Nazi propaganda and go, well, is this real or is this fake? It's like true and false. It's like a continuum, and that's what, in a certain way, what the web does, right? It equalizes everything.
Well, that's that question that was raised when the editorial step was left out when we first started on online publishing, and there's a lot of talk about gatekeepers, and some of us are going, yes, but it really helps to have someone else vet in your work, fact checking if it's nonfiction, just sort of taking a little responsibility for things. So there was I remember in the early days, there was a lot of resistance to that. It seemed like you were at risk of being in a very swampy sort of area. And that I see now that, quality, I think, always rises. And those people stepped in and said, no, I'm willing to edit in this world too, and I'm willing to help authors, have their best selves come forward. But it took a little while, and I think that, the thing about the screen world is that everything can just sort of flow in and out, and you need a certain amount of selection going on, which is, of course, what critics do, and editors do, and teachers do.
And, and reviews, play reviews, book reviews. Talk about reviewing. Sometimes you read a review, you have no idea where it originated. It could be some person online who, is hostile and is some created name and hates your play, hates a book, or a friend who wants to advance something. So it goes a lot of different ways. Sort of the Amazon reviewer versus the sort of person who's really done the work.
That's one of the interesting points in the play, that Ames is trying to demonstrate to Jay not only the significance of history to know your past in order to imagine a future, but also that, and I maybe this isn't the play, maybe this is me putting this on the play, that in order to come to something as complex and rich and sometimes, frankly, traumatizing as something like, let's just say, African American history, you have to be tutored to move into that space. And one of the great instruments for that tutelage has been Black publishers. So I felt that particular undercurrent in the play in terms of gatekeeping, that what Ames is trying to argue is that we have a specific role to play for the community at large. So that even if, for instance, in the play, Jay imagines that at some point in time we'll be able to be whomever we want to. We can move and reconstruct ourselves in these various ways, and it'll be the end of identity and the end of gender because we can be each other, right? But Ames wants to counter that by saying, well, don't you need to know something about your other in order to inhabit that experience? And I think that's, again, one of the rich challenges of the play is presenting these positions as in conversation, not simply as in opposition, but in conversation. I don't necessarily have a resolution for that, but I thought that was a rich element.
I have a question for you. So any questions, please? We want to make this as sort of, congenial as possible. Aye.
In terms of gatekeeping, I believe your work as book critics is highly important. And Ursula Le Guin had an interesting piece of writing online recently. I don't know if any of you saw it.
Her National Book Award?
No, to do with Amazon. Publishing of ebooks on Amazon. It's worth a read. She basically says their gatekeeping, bottom line, she does not use the word gatekeeping, I'm paraphrasing, is profit. So that the ebooks on Amazon are moved through quickly, and then Amazon gets another set of ebooks. And not to put too fine a point on, and now I am definitely using her words or paraphrasing closely, she says basically reading books presented by Amazon, obviously not the ones by the well-respected writers who are also in print, but reading these ebooks that move through so quickly is like the junk food. It's like eating sugary fat, and she says that basically what it does is have the reading public come to think that this is what literature is. So this is my concern about the digital world, is quality.
And quality, and I think a rich array of voices, that diversity. I mean, Walton moderated a great, and I think that's really important. Moderate a great panel about women
and race and ethnicity.
And actually there was one question I had after that panel, and you just raised it a little bit when you said there's a difference, division between the centuries and the different, so class, like people are just not talking about class and who has access to the best technology. I mean, these companies are set up so everything goes obsolete all the time, and you have to keep purchasing new stuff and new ways to read it. And I just feel like there's a widening of this class divide.
I mean, I think that's gigantically important, hyper complex. Again, I think this is one of the striking elements of Stop Reset is that I think it's Chris who's the young aspiring editor who is kind of championing, even before Jay, a kind of restructuring and turn in the play. And one of the, I think, things that kind of inspires a character like that is just the sense that everyone has one of these, and everywhere in the world. The novelist Teju Cole was in Bloomington recently to give a lecture, and it was a 2-day affair, and talked to undergraduates, and during his lecture he presented a Twitter project. And this is a guy who is a brilliant, brilliant thinker, a great writer. His novel, Open City, is one of the best books I've read in, 20 years almost of reviewing books. And he's using Twitter to create narrative. Like Jay would love him because he is building story in 140 characters. And he's doing it in different ways. Like he'll farm out a narrative that he's written and ask his friends at various times to tweet those lines back to him. So it seems as though there's a discourse happening and they're putting the story together simultaneously. And then during the World Cup, he put out calls. So last year during, I think, the semifinal matches and the final matches, he asked, wherever you are in the world, tweet a picture of yourself watching the match or your screen. And after that, he worked with a great tech artist named Jer Thorpe. And they put together all the images, and it's now going to be in the International Football Hall of Fame in I believe Manchester. And so you can go to this screen and look for, and go to any point during the 40-minute match and say, I want to look at 1919. 1919, all the images will move around and one screen will appear. And it might be someone in Kuala Lumpur who's just snapped a photograph. And so on one hand, everyone has one. It might be super sophisticated, like an iPhone or this Motorola thing, and it might be a little cheapy thing, knockoff thing, wherever you are. I think though, in terms of class and what I was mentioning before, and what Ames is thinking about in terms of history and being literate historically and culturally, that's where class comes in also, right? That different priorities for different people, right? And it's not always economics, right? Because I think there can be a range of economic situations in a room, but you might privilege reading whatever form as being significant. I think that's also a class concern, right? So I'm just agreeing with you and saying that everyone's thinking about that's indifferent.
No, that's
right?
And I mean, and LeVar Burton, you know, but I guess I'm saying it needs to be really purposeful.
Right.
Like LeVar Burton, you know, public television, his show after 30 years gets canceled, you know, and he doesn't take it lying down. He takes his Reading Rainbow online, does an app that will then broaden, but he's like really worked to get that to wide and diverse audiences. He isn't just sort of throwing it up and hoping to make some dough off it.
Right,
But
right.
being a former technologist, technology affects everyone, everywhere, and those are many computers. Chicago stated as the 4th largest city as a data hub. And so this play can literally go to any of the 7 pillars of society because of what it's bringing to the table. And so I find that part very fascinating. And so I was going to go last night too. I was just so tired. So it's so funny you're talking about it, but even the graphics that you're doing on it, that again puts that to the creative market, the creative type people. You're looking at the technology people, that's 1871. You have so much going that everybody, I think, at one point has to say, hey, we're all in this together.
Right.
How do we merge this? And I think this is like a real premier thing that you've done. So haven't seen it, but I commend you on your work.
Thank you so much.
You know, what you started to hit on it in terms of access and class and all that. And, you know, we live in a world with very advanced technology and very backward social and political systems in so many ways. And I think the recent protests around the police murders brought that to the fore, you know. And in speaking of whose stories, all these stories of people in those neighborhoods under the police brutality that don't get told. These stories don't get told. And I'm a revolutionary and a poet. One of the things that frustrates me very much about the arts now is there's so much dystopian stuff, so much about how the world could be worse, and even worse than that, and so little that's envisioning a world that's better. I hear a little bit of that in your play, although I haven't seen it. And you know, I'd encourage people to check out a very beautiful dialogue between Cornel West and Bob Avakian that really does envision a better world and grapples with how to get there. But as writers and artists and thinkers, you know, what do you think is like the artist's responsibility, both to sort of project the voices and the stories that don't get heard of the people on the bottom of the class and racial divide, and to think about and envision and put it into your art a better world? Just a question. A big question.
Anybody have any?
I'll send a very quiet, contrary note. I don't see books as social work. I think of them as great subversive missiles. And the best books in my reading life, and the book always reads us, are the ones I didn't brace for or expect. And so I don't think you can say we should be thinking about a better world, so we should be writing about a better world. I think it's much more complicated than that. And one of the ways I've been thinking about justice is, why has the cell phone been this powerful documenter of what's always been there, which is violence against Black bodies? It's been there, and now it's making us look, and primates are so visual, and it's changing our world via this technology that the most beautiful preaching in the world hasn't accomplished. So I think it's very, very, the lines are crooked, but beautiful things can happen even when you don't intend them to.
Hi, I wanted to say say it's a great panel, and I really came here. I didn't really know any of you, but I came to see Miss Taylor because I admire her work, especially in Our Flyaway, and then the play Crowns, which was written by a classmate of mine, Craig Marbury. We graduated from 8th grade together.
Oh.
But I wanted to know from all of you all, do you all have any kind of tips for new writers, new published authors? I'm a self-published author. And it's a historical nonfiction book, inspirational story. And it's, to touch on what you spoke about, it's about the legacy of my grandmother's business, being in business over 50 years, and how she migrated here from the South with carrying all she owned in her 2 hands. So it's called With These Hands, a country girl came to town. And I wanted to know how to get more exposure for it.
So so many authors, you're right to ask the question. I mean, so many authors bash their publishers for not doing enough for them. I feel like if you are a writer and you've done a book, like part of your responsibility is helping it find its audience. And I think that's one way technology is really helpful. I think you just try to find an audience. And then you also, I also don't believe, like, I think books are not like fruits or vegetables. They do not rot away. You have to stay in it for the long haul. You push that book and get it out there, and it should have a long life. And the other thing I will say, I mean, I think that it is very difficult for a self-published author. It's difficult for, like, most authors who are not, Veronica Roth and, that kind of author. J.K. Rowling. Really, even best-selling authors, it's really, really tough. So I would say I would really think about finding a publisher who will help you and be your partner in getting it into the world. I do believe that there's really good publishers around. One of them, I think, Agate, Doug Siebel was around. There's lots of small publishers. That's one thing that's happened with this technology, is that you can produce fewer books, smaller scale, and push them out more. So,
you said everything I would say, and I read this great article maybe about 3 weeks ago in the New York Times Sunday magazine about this young couple in Detroit who write books together.
Yeah.
I think it's called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. If you go to the Times website and put that in, you'll find them. And I think one of they don't say this directly, but one of the things that emerges is that they just write incessantly. They give themselves daily deadlines, weekly, monthly deadlines, and in producing so much work, they're actually getting better. And so the books, they notice a change from the first book they did together to the moment, to this moment now, where I think annually, each of them writes an individually authored novel, and then they write a 3rd book together. And literally they're exercising that muscle so much that they're becoming narrative specialists. They understand all the different ways they can structure a story. But in that practice, like any other kind of artistic endeavor, you're going to improve, and then through the process of continually trying to get your work in front of your audience and that practice, I think you'll construct the career that you want to have out of that. But I would say it's those 2 things.
Yeah.
Always be pushing electronically and always be writing.
and I would add that it can be really lonely. So I am a big believer in writing groups, reading groups. You draw inspiration from one another. And in the editing and the pushing, and you form a community. It can be lonely out there. So.
Just another quick question. Since you're all book critics, with the exception of the playwright here, what do you think of Vita, the online the group that monitors and tracks statistically the proportion of books by women that are reviewed. For example,
Yeah, this
your
is the
panel
panel.
must have
Yeah,
dealt with that.
it was specifically about that.
I'd be interested in your opinions of that effort that they're making.
I come back to this question of class.
Mm.
And I feel like Vita is great, and I'm no question it's made a difference. But I also think that what we will get are sort of more credentialized women in a certain way. And I think that there needs to be a little bit more thinking about class in this world. So, but that, I love Vita. I think nobody wants to talk about class.
And this is not to run away from class. I think, and here I'm thinking also about Ames, who I can't now leave because
Right.
he's embedded here. It's very difficult to imagine some kind of hopeful future if, in fact, we aren't replenishing our imaginations as broadly as we can. And if we're limited to a book world that is driven by men's imaginations, then we're just that limited, right? And if we're only limited by the imaginations of white folks or books made for potentially only a white audience, then we're extremely limited. And so what Vita, and one of the organizers for Vita was on that panel, Kate Marvin, who's also a rather brilliant poet. What she was saying about the numbers in terms of racial and ethnic representation among the women they were trying to profile for each of these magazines, because the first iteration was just counting the numbers of women's work who were being reviewed or reviewers. Then the next phase brought in race and ethnicity. And the numbers got skewed because there were a lot of people who refused to identify in any particular racial or ethnic fashion. So what they've realized, and none of them are sociologists, so they've had to inquire with sociologists and think about how to frame the questions, they've had to offer an array of kind of identifiers, if you will. And maybe class will also be in that array so that they can get a more clear sense of how these reviewers are identifying themselves, or how they're being read, or how they imagine they're being read socially. And I think that's right. Maybe we have an American sticking point with race and ethnicity, and so we need all this other ways of thinking of ourselves. And I think this is crucial for what Ames imagines his books do in the world, because he ultimately understands himself as someone who created himself by way of reading and thinking and imagining. And so if we continue to limit ourselves, we're going to run into a dead end. But if we start imagining ourselves as the other, however we're framing the other, we may in fact liberate ourselves in ways that we hadn't imagined, right? And hopefully that's what emerges out of Vita. And I think that's the reading world that Ames wants to maintain, and that in the play Jay is also suggesting might be available to us electronically. So even to get to that gamble, I think that we have to have a broad spectrum of possibilities in terms of our reading and those who are making the criticism.
It's a really, in the end, it's a really hopeful play, because it imagines a future where sort of nobody is laid off. They all go forward. They all collaborate and think about what's the future. And it made me feel really good.
I taught a class this spring in Bloomington. It was a general education course, so it's a sophomores and some freshmen, a few upperclassmen in there. And just after midterm, we were talking about something that had happened. Can't recall what it was, and I was explaining something about the university and how in order to keep their numbers up, and this isn't like a kind of stated goal, but they have to turn the university into a kind of large mall, and they treat the students in some ways as customers. And so in 1990, when I showed up on Bloomington's campus in the summer before I became a freshman, the first thing that they did was took us to the library. They said, okay, here's the library, take a tour, learn how it operates. You come to understand that all the answers are present there. They don't take freshmen to the library any longer. And actually, they take them to all the spaces where they might be social. In fact, they've turned the bottom levels of Wells Library on the Bloomington campus. I think it still holds the most volumes of any university campus in the country. They've turned it into like what I call the old-fashioned like Pan Am airport lounges with really swanky seats and a lot of group educational spaces. And it's for tech-savvy students. But in this class, as we were talking about this, there was one young woman who I thought at the beginning of the semester, and if you've ever taught, you always have that moment where I'm not sure about this young person, if they're gonna make it through the term or not. And she said that she was studying with one of her classmates who was just sitting next to her in the library earlier that week. And someone from another table came over and asked the two of them what they were talking about. And they both held up the novel that we happened to have been reading. And this other young woman said, that's really interesting because we kind of were overhearing the way you two were talking, and we never talk about classes that way. And what she picked up just at that point in, I think, 10 weeks or so, was that there's a way that the book can enliven your imagination, but also teach you all these other things that you didn't realize you were gonna need. Like what it means to be a close reader, how to understand metaphor, what a sentence ought to do. And suddenly she was shocked to realize that she wasn't really prepared to be a student until she came to thinking about the novel as more than just a storytelling machine, but also as a way of invigorating her mind. So I think that there's plenty of possibility that, however they're reading, right? Because I think that was happening for other people who were reading off their computers. They just don't know that it's cool to read. So whatever age they find out that it's okay that they're readers, that's when they take off. So it's still possible.
Well, thank you so much for being here, panelists, and Goodman, and please check out bookcritics.org, our website.
And go see Stop Reset.
Yeah, well,